Welcome to the Transform Your Mind to Transform Your Life radio hour and podcast. I'm your host, Life Coach Myrna Young, and sitting in the guest chair today is Sam Morris. I didn't mention this to Sam before, but we have the same name. I'm Myrna Morris Young. So I used to be Morris for a long time, right? Yes. So Sam is the managing director at Five to Flow LLC, and we're going to be talking on the topic today of how to overcome your life story. Welcome, Sam.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to be here. And yes, I love that synchronicity.
Yeah, I know, right? That's awesome. All right. Okay. Let me give you a little bit more information. And Sam Morris says that he saw an opportunity to put his passion to use by becoming a personal trainer. In 2017, he decided to expand his wellness practice to increase his impact. He also founded the Unbreakable Human Collective, where his mission is to impact 1 billion humans. Nice goal. Sam serves as the managing director and the chief culture officer for Five to Flow LLC, a global collective that builds integrative organizational wellness solutions designed to achieve and sustain peak performance. So, as I mentioned, we're going to be talking today about your story. And as I was sitting here a few minutes ago, just letting my energy flow into the universe and think about the people that I want to hear this message. I got a little download to start it off about my story, because yes, fortunate for me, I didn't identify too much with my story, because my story is that I was born in a very poor country, Guyana. My mother and father didn't have much. My grandmother and my mom were both domestic servants. We didn't have much. And during that time, I was also sexually abused. So I never identified with that story, because somehow God put in me all of the things that I'm good at for a very early age. I was good in school. I have great personality. Teachers liked me. And I never really identified with that story and that role. And now that I'm a coach, I'm in the personal development space. I am, trying to motivate and incense people. The story that I tell myself now is that I was born for greater things, and the story of my birth has was just basically almost like Jesus. You have to be born in a certain way in order for it to transform you into who you need to become. So the fact that Sam has dedicated his work to be talking about the story that men in particular tell themselves, so that's what the conversation that we're going to have. So, Sam, you mentioned that you help men overcome their life stories, traumas, and blocks to be the men in the world that we need them to be. So I'm assuming that you have a story that somehow parallels this, because you have to go through it before you can help other people. So do you mind sharing your story or how you started doing this work?
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to. Thank you so much. I think it's great that you were able to kind of transmute your story from that one of pain and perceive really, really bad experiences into one of purpose and passion. That's amazing. And that's really where the magic happens with stories. So my story, the story itself is that I grew up, was born with my umbilical cord wrapped around my head. So I couldn't breathe from birth. I had to do the emergency C-section. So there was that. And then for the first, almost really 30 years of my life, but the first 15, I was very, very sick. Really severe food allergies, but like a long list of food allergies. People say, "What are you allergic to?" And I'm like, basically everything except water and air.
Wow,
and
wow.
and then a therapist affectionately pointed out to me that actually, because of I also had asthma, so really I was also allergic to air.
Oh, wow.
um,
Yeah,
so
yeah, yeah. Bad
um,
start. Mm-hmm.
well, a start, yes.
Right.
It was so the thing about that was is that that's the physical manifestation of the story. So being coming into the world, not being able to breathe. There was a period in my mother's womb when she thought that I was cancer. She thought she had cancer. She didn't know she was
Oh,
pregnant. So
oh my goodness.
my energies and my soul and my spirit were immediately put into like, you have to fight. Like, you have to fight. You have to look at reasons. You have to find reasons to be loved. It was a self-love was not a part of my vocabulary or thought process or anything for a very long time.
Wow.
And so from the childhood of being super sick with the asthma and the food allergies, I also had a tendency to choke on my food a lot. So I had the Heimlich maneuver done on me, I think around 5 or 6 times from my mom or friends' moms or whoever I was with at the time. All of it basically ties back to not being able to breathe. So I had this
Mm,
idea, this story that I need to fight for breath and fight for
mm,
love. And
mm.
so
Hmm.
what I did is I learned or made up the story that in order to be loved, I had to have a reason to be saved. So my story was around saving. Like, you have to save me. Other people have to save me. Because as a
Ah,
child, when you're
yeah.
0 to 15 years old, if you have an asthma attack at 2 a.m., like, there's not much you can do except go to your parents and be like, help me. And so
Save
I
me.
actually
Yeah,
physically
yeah,
had to do, yeah, and the Heimlich
yeah.
maneuver, if I'm choking on food, like, people constantly had to save me. So this story was getting imprinted and imprinted and imprinted and just told to me over again. So I decided this was the way it's going to be, is that if I'm in a relationship with a woman or a friend or my parents or family, whatever it is, that in order for you to show me that you love me, you have to somehow
Save me.
save me. Yeah,
Wow.
I know.
Wow.
And so
Wow.
later in life, I battled addiction from ages, my early 20s into my late 30s, almost 15 to 18 years of really hardcore, pretty destructive addiction. And so again, that was actually me creating reasons to be saved.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it was also, there's some depression and anxiety and a lack of self-love that fueled all that. But
Mm-hmm.
it was a lot of a manifestation of, like, I need a reason to matter. And that reason is, like,
Mm.
if I'm not being saved, I don't matter. So
Wow.
my story of
That's
being
deep.
saved was very
Yeah.
yeah, my story of being saved was very, very detrimental and destructive to me. And I didn't recognize this until I started diving into this maybe 3 or 4 years ago, about, like, why are these patterns repeating in my life? Why are these patterns of destruction or these self-sabotaging
Did you do it
behaviors?
yourself or you had therapy?
A lot of both. I
Okay.
did a lot of therapy,
Okay.
but then I kind of therapies. I found that there's a lot of value in therapy, and if you need to go to therapy, I'll tell my clients, like, listen, if what we're doing is not working and you need therapy, or you want to add on therapy, like, please go. It's very, very helpful. However,
Mm.
I got to the point where, like, I started just operating in what I knew about, like what I was, hyper aware of. And
Okay.
so this diving into when this story became apparent to me, it was
Mm-hmm.
something I didn't know about. I was like, whoa, I don't, someone asked me, like, what's the story you make up about yourself, others, and the world? And it all came back to, like, I need to be saved. People need to save me, and the world is dangerous, and I need to be saved from it. So it all came
Mm.
back to this. And
Mm-hmm.
so after, you know, I've been on a mission the past 3 or 4 years to basically learn everything I don't know that I need to know to remove these blocks, to handle these stories, and to transmute them into the more positive impact that we were talking about. So, my root story was that, if I say I love you to a girl, for example, like, I do, I love you, and she says it back, and she says I love you back, but my subconscious was writing a contract between the two of us that, okay, so you said you love me and I say I loved you. Now I'm your
I know where this is
responsibility to
going.
save.
Yes,
Now you have to
yes,
save me.
yes, yes,
So
yes, yes,
and I
yes.
didn't know it and she didn't know it, and that's a recipe for disaster.
And I guess if you thought that you needed saving and she didn't save you, you would think that she doesn't really love me. I'm sure that's where
100%.
that
Yep.
was. Right, right,
And so that
right.
way, when I would get broken up with or heartbroken, that was like a fate worse than death, because that meant, like, oh my gosh, like, there's no one left to save me. Like what
Right.
can I do now to create um, an environment where I need saving, and who can I
Wow.
turn to save me? Family, friends, jobs, drugs, alcohol, all of it
Right.
was like geared around me trying to find safety or trying to be saved.
Okay. So that was a very different and interesting story. I don't think I've heard that type of a story before. But I want to circle back to something that you mentioned but glossed over it. So did your lack of self-love, I know you talked about fighting to breed. You mentioned that your mom thought she had cancer when you were in uterus.
Hmm.
So did your relationship with your mom continued down that path of no love? Is that part of the
No,
foundation of this?
no. My relationship with my mom, it deteriorated through my addiction.
Ah,
But prior to that, my mom was she was the primary caregiver in the house. My
okay,
dad, and not to say like my dad was absentee father. He wasn't.
okay,
He was there, and I played tennis all through my life, and so
okay,
he was kind of my tennis coach, tennis
okay,
manager, and he would take me to tournaments. But my mom, when it came to like doing homework or struggling in school, or
okay,
she was the one that was around a lot.
okay. All
And
right.
so it was a very loving. I mean, my household and my childhood, from
Okay,
an external perspective, was amazing. Like I would
okay.
play tennis and golf all summer. I would go skiing every winter. We traveled to the Bahamas, and
Wow.
like a lot of love and a lot of parties and
Okay.
laughter and all this stuff. But internally, I had this battle going on.
Wow. Wow. All right. Well, yes, that is a good story. Now, another question I want to, because curiosity.
Hmm.
So you went from someone that couldn't read to your bio said that you become a personal trainer. So, just for curiosity's sake, for me and my listeners, how did you transcend the asthma, can't breathe to physical fitness?
So tennis was my catalyst there.
Okay.
When I was really young, I mean, gosh, as long as I can remember, really, probably 6, 7, 8 years old, I picked up a
Okay.
tennis racket and fell in love. And so
Okay.
tennis was my first love and my first savior. Like tennis
Okay.
saved me from the social anxiety. So as a kid, like being that sick, I felt
Mm,
extremely different from all my peers, and I hated social situations, birthday parties, all that
mm,
stuff. They were threats to me. Like I might eat
mm.
a peanut, or I may have an asthma attack, and what if my parents run around? Like, who's going to
Wow.
save me? So
Wow.
tennis was an individual sport that allowed me, constant breaks, and
Okay.
so and it turned out like it was natural for me. Like I
Okay.
loved it, and I was good at it, and it worked well. And it's like my goal until I was probably 20 years old was to be a professional tennis player.
Right.
That was
And
it.
I'm assuming it built your breath situation so that
Yeah.
you can breathe
Hmm.
better. Right. Okay. It
Yep.
was a training for
Endurance.
that. Okay.
Yeah,
Right.
it was, and
Okay.
so so also what it did is like, so a sport like basketball or soccer, for example,
Mm,
you're running around all the time, and so
mm-hmm.
that as an asthmatic kid is very scary, because when am I going to get a break when am I going to get a chance if I have an asthma attack to take a rest? Whereas
Okay.
tennis,
Right.
a point in tennis may last like 15 seconds, and then you
Okay.
get a break
A
for 30
break.
seconds, and then you
Right.
can
Right.
change sides every other game. So you're
Yes.
constantly getting a chance
That
to catch
makes
your breath.
sense.
Yeah.
Yes. That makes sense.
So,
That makes
and then
sense.
from
Mm-hmm.
that, like I really developed a passion for like the off court training and staying in shape. So a lot of my personal training was stuff that I had learned in tennis, because tennis is like it translates really well to movement in life, of side to side, keeping your balance, being very reactive, like all these things. Like it served me very well as a personal trainer, because I was able to translate all those trainings to
Okay.
actual, like helping people move around their house better, move around the sidewalks better. And
Mm.
so um and I did recognize too that, like like all that endurance that I had to build up through tennis was very effective in handling the asthma as well.
Yeah. It's good. Excellent. Excellent. All right. So, how does rewriting your life story help with organizational wellness and peak performance,
Mm.
which is what you segued into?
Yes. So the writing your personal story. So if you're in an organizational culture, the culture is where I focus all my energies on, in that, or in Five to Flow, in the organization there. So within the culture, you have to have a culture of inclusivity, and by inclusivity I mean there's also there's the whole DEI conversation about diversity, equity, inclusion. But what I'm talking about here is the inclusion of, like, as a organization, you have to have a culture of feeling safe, allowing your employees to be creative, to be innovative, to show up at work as their best self. So what that does is when you write your life story around living my purpose. I'm transcending the negative stuff. I'm transcending my negative story. I'm transcending that story that keeps me comfortable, that's familiar, but not necessarily productive or growth oriented. So when you can transcend that story and show up in your organization as your highest and best self, that's when the organization. So everyone says there's no I in team, but there is a me. If you want an entire organization to flow and to work well and to be innovative and lead their market and lead their industry, you have to have individuals that are free of their stories, that are sovereign in their beings, and that have healthy lifestyles, that have joy in their life, that have passion outside of work, all those things that matter to show, so that they can show up at work in their strongest and highest and best self.
That's great. Sounds great on paper, but we know that doesn't really happen because who you are is how you show up. When I did executive coaching, we talked with leaders that, who they are is who they show up because that's their personality. Whatever happened in their past is how they're going to show up. So, how do you get them from there to here?
From that place of almost toxic behavior to the
Right.
place of being a good
Trauma,
leader.
toxicity,
Yeah.
blocks. You mentioned blocks. A lot of people have blocks from their childhood that they
Yeah.
bring
So the
forward.
first thing,
Right.
yeah, the first thing is it's an awareness. You
Okay.
have to, a lot of people like, they notice what a lot of people notice is that this is what happens. So they're that person you're talking about where they experience um, resistance or confrontation or conflict, whatever it is. All they really do is respond to that event. So
Mhm.
they're constantly in a treating the symptoms framework, whereas they're responding to an event, and by the time the event's happened, it's too late. So what you have to do is you have to be aware of, you have to reverse engineer that event all the way back to the trauma that inspires your reaction to that event. So that could be 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 15 years old. But when you can reverse engineer that event basically from the event, like, okay, I responded out of anger because actually what it was is that I was scared and my manhood was being threatened or something like that. So I responded out of anger because I feel like if I respond any other way, my leadership will be in question, and then I'm going to lose my job and basically die. That's the natural process for a human, for the thinking. So if
Mhm.
you can say, okay, this event I responded in anger. Well, okay, what was behind the anger? Behind the anger was fear. Okay, what was behind the fear? Behind the fear was an insecurity. Okay, what caused that insecurity? Like what was going on in the room? Maybe the room reminded you of a friend's house where the dad was really mean and it made you feel insecure. Like it could be anything. That's just an example. But if you can reverse engineer from the event, like to the day, to the week, to the month leading up to it, like what was going on? Maybe there was something that you were really unsettled about in your personal life that manifested itself in lashing out at a coworker. And then from there, what you can do, so the awareness is there now. What you have to have now is the willingness. You have to have the willingness to go back and look at like, okay, I felt rejected when I was 12 years old, and this girl chose my best friend over me. And so
Mhm.
now, whenever at work, if I start to feel rejected, I fall back to being that 12-year-old boy that got rejected.
Yeah.
And so now, when you can say like, okay, that's like you do the parts work and the shadow work and the inner child work, and you go back and you do that stuff, that inner child now feels safe and protected, and that manifests itself in a more calm, productive, non-toxic leader, man, whatever it is, female, whatever it is in the organization.
Yeah, that's good. That's great. As you were talking, I remembered this. I'm not sure if it was a book or a podcast that I was listening to, but the author mentioned that. Um, Actually, I think it was a podcast I was listening to, and Oprah was doing the interview, and the author talked about going back to your childhood home and looking through the window and see what you see when you look through the window of your childhood home, because the eyes that you're looking through that window signifies your mindset or your state of mind about the events that was going on in your life. And Oprah talked about looking through her window, and I actually did that exercise myself, where I went back to my childhood home and looked through that window with eyes of, was I happy? Was, what was going on with me in school and my friends, and just trying to get a snapshot. So that's what you're talking about. Yeah, a lot of times you do have to go back to the trauma and look at it from those eyes, and maybe you will see something different. A lot of times when you go back with a different kind of mindset, you'll see. But sometimes what you were being traumatized about is 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 nothing. You know what I mean? But the story that you've been telling yourself for 40 years, 30 years, is
Mhm.
that something happened to you that was traumatic, and you kept replaying and replaying it. So that's actually good work. So that's good work, and I understand how that would transmute to organizational wellness, because if you've got team members or you know uh, team leaders that are not showing up with their best self, then the whole organization suffers. So good. You had a
100%. It's a
rebuttal on
trickle
that?
down effect. I
Yeah.
mean, no, no rebuttal. I'm just totally agreeing with you. It's a top down model with
Mhm,
leadership. If the leadership has to, they're the ones responsible for maintaining that culture and
mhm.
maintaining the organizational flow and the purpose and the mission, the values, and all the things that they're going to make the organization run better. Start at the top.
Okay. All right. Good. 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 Good work. Now, you talked here about vulnerability. So,
Mm.
why do you think getting vulnerable is the real magic bullet to obtain personal freedom and transformation? So, first of all, before you answer the question, you need to explain what vulnerable is for a man, because I mean, I'm not in a man's shoes, so I don't
Hmm.
understand. I know that you work. I think, is it specifically with men or mostly men?
Specifically with men.
Okay, all right. So good.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay.
So vulnerability for a guy is like, it's basically think about to make this tangible, to think about the things that either you're afraid to talk about because you're not supposed to feel. Society
Mm,
doesn't let you talk about because you'll look weak.
mm,
Um, those are two big examples right there. But like, think
I
about
get it.
all those things that you just avoid addressing all the time.
Right.
Those are the
Okay.
things you need to get vulnerable about, because it's a vulnerability is like a or those things are like a beach ball. So if you're in the ocean and you have a beach ball and it's fully inflated, and you're trying to put it underwater, like that beach ball is going to always pop back up.
Right.
Always, always,
Good
always. So that's
analogy.
your trauma is popping back up.
Excellent.
That's your self.
Excellent
Well,
analogy. Yes.
it gets better. So
Hmm.
that's your self sabotage always popping up. Your repeated destructive patterns always popping up. That beach ball represents that. Now, vulnerability is opening up the little tab and taking all the air out of the beach ball.
Mm,
So if you want to keep that beach ball underwater now, it's completely deflated. It's going to be really easy to keep underwater because you got vulnerable and you let all the air
all
out of
that
all
stuff
those
out.
traumas, all those patterns, all that self-destructive, self-sabotaging behavior. But that vulnerability is what lets all the air out of the beach ball.
All right. So I have a follow-up question here, because again, when I'm talking to my guests, I keep getting downloads about
Hmm.
things, something I remember, something that you trigger by your talk. And I remember Tyler Perry talking about this particular subject, but he talked about the fact that he was taught that men don't cry, and that
Mm.
he's gone to funerals and people told him, don't cry, you're a man. And so that's the only thing that I can think of about men being weak, don't cry.
Hmm.
So give me an example of a vulnerability, because obviously nobody's crying in the office, a vulnerability that a man needs to go around in a workplace, in an environment. Again, because I don't
So,
know men.
so yeah. So
Mhm.
it's not so much a vulnerability. Vulnerability is the action that you take to avoid the insecurity, the fear,
Mhm.
the
Ah,
the quote unquote weakness, the perceived
got
weakness.
you.
Like, vulnerability is going to be what accesses that for you.
Okay.
But one of the insecurities could be um, something about like so say it's a president of a company, president of a board, a vice
Mhm.
president of a board, someone underneath them comes at and says like, like the way we've been doing this all for the past 7 or 8 years is not working anymore. How do we change this? Now, the president who implemented that initial strategy might think, oh gosh, like this is completely threatening me as a president. It's threatening my job, therefore it's threatening my family, and therefore it's threatening me as a man, because now I'm going to lose my job, my wife is going to leave me, and I'm going to die alone.
You keep going back to that one, huh?
I mean, it's
All right.
relevant. It just makes a lot of sense to
Right,
people.
right. Okay. All right. So I get it. Yes. Yeah. They're they're being threatened by insubordinate. Got it. Got
Yeah.
it. I love it. All right. So why do you surrender to set yourself free as it pertains to health and wellness? So I like your beach ball analysis. So you let the air out of the beach ball. You now can control it. You can stick it underwater or whatever. And when it goes underwater, it's not going to necessarily, pop back up. So I like our topic because we were touching stuff that, it's new to me. So how did this, CEO surrender um, and set himself free and also become healthy? Because I guess that's the focus. The focus is to be vulnerable and the focus is for health and wellness, right?
Well, yeah, and so I think in the context here would be the mental, psychological, emotional health and wellness, emotional intelligence.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right.
Yeah. So the idea of surrender is this. The idea of surrender is that if you're constantly hanging on tight or protecting yourself or trying to stay safe or trying to keep your position of power or fighting against these thoughts that are there, but you're ignoring them, you're very rigid. Like you're basically in a very precarious place. Like by trying to stay so safe, you're actually making yourself unsafe. So when you surrender that fight, when you surrender to the experiences that you're having, and you surrender to the thoughts that are coming up, and you surrender to the willingness to address these things, what happens is that you free yourself up, and you free yourself of those hooks from the trauma, from the fear, from the anxiety, from the stories. You free yourself of all that by surrendering to them. Because if you're constantly ignoring them, if you're keeping them here, they're not going anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
They're always at an arm's length away. But
Mm-hmm.
if you surrender and let them in a safe environment, therapist office, with a coach, ceremonies, whatever you're going to do, when you surrender and let them in, you say, come in here, let's talk about this. I'm surrendering to what this experience is offering me and teaching me. And then I'm going to go out into the world, and I'm going to be a stronger, safer, more resilient man.
Okay. So I get it. A lot of times, if I can, go into the mind of, my husband or something like that, the ego comes into play a lot. And when somebody is, you know, um, knocking you down as a man, right? And you feel that this person is testing your manhood, then you react a certain way. So I think what you're saying is you surrender the thoughts that are making you think that somebody is, attacking your manhood or attacking your knowledge or you're attacking your intelligence or any of the things that, I hear my husband saying, I'm not stupid.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, so is that what you're
Well,
talking
so
about? Give us some
I
example,
mean,
right?
you don't really, so you don't really surrender to that. If you surrender to that, you kind of, that's when I think the anger and the fear, like you're surrendering to the voices and the stories. What you do is you surrender the fight. You stop fighting against it.
Oh
So
wow.
when you stop fighting and you start accepting, like, okay, so you accept that, like, you know what, this makes me angry. When someone threatens my intelligence, I have to respond with, I'm not stupid. Instead of like, so that's treating a symptom. So what you do by surrendering is you go back to the root. You surrender to the, not so much you surrender to the emotion or the anger, you surrender to the experience of it so that you can now address where it's coming from. Because when you can address where it's coming from, you can stop it, take all the power away from it.
So let's keep on the stupid thing. So let's say if somebody is at work and someone challenges them, like asks them a stupid question
Mm-hmm.
that maybe they think the person is inferring something to their intelligence. So the end result is to not get angry, not surrender to the emotion. But in order to get there, there's a long road backwards because maybe all your life you have been, you hate when people attack your intelligence. Maybe because, yeah, maybe a lot of these things go back even to school when somebody tells them that they're not smart enough, or I hear so many stories about teachers telling kids that they can't do this or they're not smart enough, or whatever. And those things get imprinted, I like your word, imprinted in their mind. So then they always have to defend that. So yeah, they're in the boardroom right now and they get triggered about their intelligence, and they might not respond, I'm not stupid, but they think it. You're thinking that I'm stupid. What kind of question is that? So, tell somebody that's listening exactly how they would surrender that. What are the steps?
So the step would be to, first of all, figure out why you feel the need to defend yourself all the time about being stupid. So that goes back to like, when did you make up the story that you're stupid? Because that person, because they think that what's happening is that person attacking their intelligence is
Mhm.
attacking the part of them inside of them that actually thinks that.
Mm.
So there's a part of that person that thinks I am stupid because I got a bad grade in geometry in sixth grade. I got an F in geometry in sixth grade. So
Mhm.
people call me stupid. Okay. So therefore now that person by always defending, by their ego gets to be right. When someone else calls them stupid, their ego is like, that's right, we are stupid. But wait, being stupid's not good. So I need to exclaim and proclaim that I'm not stupid. When in reality, like they're sitting in they could be the CEO or the president or the owner or whatever. They have evidence in their life that's not true, but being stupid is familiar and comfortable to them because their ego, it allows them to feel safe, and it allows them to feel like maybe if someone looked at them as super intelligent, then they would have some sort of it feels very unsafe to them for some reason. As much as they might want that and they think they want that, if that was the case, they would start looking, if they hadn't handled the initial trauma or the story, they would start looking for evidence that they're stupid again.
Really?
So there's a great story about this guy. He took his SATs, and he ended up getting like a 780 on the first SAT, and everyone's like, you know what, you're stupid. Like you're not going to college. Like you're never going to have a job. Like
Yeah.
you're destined
Yeah.
for
Right.
disaster.
Right.
So he's
Mm-hmm.
like, well, let me take the SATs again. And he got his scores back, and they said that okay, you got a 1460 this time.
Which is the
So
top
now
score, I
everyone,
think, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
1600,
Yeah.
I think
Right.
1600 was the top.
1600. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So
Mm-hmm.
basically a very, very good score.
Mm-hmm.
So now all his teachers, he all of a sudden gets put in advanced placement classes in college, and all his teachers think he's like super smart, and he gets all these opportunities because he got a high SAT score. So he shifted his internal story around from being stupid to like, I'm a genius. And he
Mm-hmm.
behaved as such for the rest of his life, and people treated him as such for the rest of his life.
Mm-hmm.
But that second test, he actually by mistake got someone else's results. So those weren't his results,
Wow.
but he didn't know this until 30 years later. And so,
Wow.
but him like being treated that way and him thinking that way about himself, and having formulating a new story around it
Mm-hmm.
allowed him to be very successful and smart, because he didn't have the I'm stupid story. He didn't have that defense in his repertoire.
Okay.
So it's just it speaks to the power of the mind and the power of stories,
Yeah.
really.
Yeah. 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 It's true. It's very true. The power of the mind and the power of stories. Like we started off by saying that the stories that you tell yourself and your mindset, could be detrimental because
Mm,
very few people tell the good stories, like make things up. You know what I mean?
yeah,
I'm a
yeah.
genius. I am the best thing ever. No, but because I think I heard that we always um, are drawn to the negative situations in our lives or the negative things. And that's what we repeat. That's what your mind repeats. And that's what the mind keeps telling you. So It's very interesting, the story that you just told, because I thought that the catch to it was that even though that he got the 1460, because he got the first one at 700, he might still subconsciously think he was stupid. I thought that's where you're going with that. But
Mm.
he chose to believe that, hey, the first one was something wrong, and the second one was the correct score, right? And
Hmm.
that transformed his life, because now he acted smart. And something, anything that you act, you become. You know that, right? As a coach, I mean, if you think that you're a certain something, then you become it. So by him thinking that he was smart, that he was brilliant, that he was genius, he lived his life thinking that way. And I bet that if someone said something to him in a conference that um, that someone else might think, what's behind this question? Are you thinking that I'm stupid? He wouldn't even go there, because he already knows that he's not stupid, right?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, people would never even ask that of him. People would never even accuse him of it because he doesn't have that in his energy.
Right, in his energy.
His vibration, his frequency don't have that.
Right,
So
right.
it's not even a thing.
Right, right, right. Good. Yes, yes. So, again, if you're listening, this is very important information here. The information is that, what we're saying is that there's a lot of negative thoughts that can bring you down, that can change your world experience or your life experience, right? If we're talking about what Sam said, how his story felt that, he always needed to be saved, and that thought process, you know, allowed him to not maybe have some very good relationships. The same thing we're talking about. You taking your story, something your guidance counselor said to you, something, someone called you in school, or you got rejected, as we said, and whatever. And when you take those stories into the present moment, in fact, I was listening to Eckhart Tolle and Oprah a couple of days ago, and they were saying that everything happens in the present moment. And when you go back to your past, whether it's 8 years old, where somebody did something to you, the fact that you're remembering it, you're bringing it right back into your present. So it's happening again to you. So when you bring all those negative things right back into your present moment, you're living it, it's in your present moment. And then you take it on every day and every day. So if you have the choice, and normally you can't get there by yourself, which is why I asked Sam earlier if he did therapy, or he discovered what his what was the thing that was holding him down all his life, and he said some, whatever. But most times you can't get there by yourself, because you always have these blind spots, you don't see these things. So being with a coach or a therapist can allow you to see your story, and how you keep getting triggered, and you keep bringing it back into the present moment. And the only way to um to get rid of that story is to surrender the thoughts, to be vulnerable, all the words that we're talking about here, right?
Yeah, Joe Dispenza talks about that a lot too, about how every time that you feel or experience those negative emotions, and you don't have the capabilities, the coping mechanisms, you relive all those stories, so you stay in that story.
Yep, 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 definitely true. So very important information to have. All right, so
Hmm.
now tell us about your organization, Five to Flow.
So
Your mandate is to help foster organizational wellness, and I'm glad that we kind of identify that wellness as health and wellness, your mindset. So how do you, yeah, what do you guys do? What do you guys offer?
what we do at Five to Flow is we look at 5 areas of organizational wellness, and we have on our website, we have a wellness wave, which is a diagnostic tool that anybody can go take,
Mm-hmm.
and it will spit us back a score. There's 2 versions. There's a short version and a long form version. That anybody in the organization can take it. People can get an organizational version of it and give it to their employees. So what we do is we get a score from 1 to 5 back on
Mm-hmm.
how all their employees answered questions. And the 5 areas are process, people, culture, analytics, and technology. So each one of those areas has 25 questions for the long form and 5 questions for the short one about the employee or the leadership team or the CEO, C-level, C-suite team, about their experience of those 5 areas of the business. So if they say, if you, for example, have like a 5 on technology, like you have all the latest technology, but your processes are a 2, you're leaving a lot of bandwidth on the table because your processes are not matching up with your technology. Same thing as if your processes are, process and culture go a lot together, but like, your numbers are not matching up and your culture is a really low number, is because your culture, your employee, something about your way your employees are showing up, the environment you're cultivating at your office is not lining up. So I'll come in and look at culture, which is values, vision, purpose, grit, leadership, and container. And so looking at all those areas that basically promote creativity, promote joy, promote innovation, promote productivity, mental health, like all these things. How does your organization handle all this stuff? So we go in and basically it's a holistic approach to a bit. It's a whole new it's really a whole new market of business consulting. We're doing it a completely different way. So that's what I do. And then on the other side of that, if there's individuals within the organization, maybe the CEO has that toxic behavior that we're talking about, what I'll do is I'll come in as a one-on-one coach where I have the Unbreakable Human Collective, and I'll take him on as a VIP client, one-on-one client, work with him for 90 days, remove all the things that are fueling that toxic behavior. And then that way his leadership, he can be more accessible to his team, to his company, to his organization. And again, have that like top-down leadership where he's really leading and not so much barking orders. Or, I mean, that's a very general example, but like remove all the toxicity from the environment, and then that creates a much more open, innovative, collaborative culture.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's actually very good work. So you said it really quickly. So is it the 5 areas is people, culture, analytics, technology, and process? Is that what you said?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So I got it down. All right. And then you explained a couple. I mean, a lot of people don't understand what culture is, but culture has become one of the top things that people, outside person, when they're evaluating companies, that's what they use. They use the culture of the organization, and then of course you broke it down, and so what that means. Then you mentioned about processes and technology. What does analytic mean? Analytic mean what? Yeah, tell me, what does analytic mean?
It's numbers. It's where do your sales numbers at? Where are your productivity
Oh,
numbers at?
okay.
Where are your employee it's called employee net promoter scores. Like where are all these numbers lining up, and how do you keep track of these numbers? Like, you have processes in place that automatically keep track of these numbers, or are people just throwing darts in the dark, or do you have actual things that people are aiming for?
Good. That's awesome. That's awesome. And the people, where do you go with the
Well,
people? That's the
health and
diversity. Okay.
yeah, health, no, it's a diversity, equity, inclusion is included in the culture.
Okay,
That's
in the
under the
culture.
culture department. So
Okay.
people is health and wellness of their employees. A lot. It's not so much. It's based on how do they have the energy to show up to the office. So it's around their health and wellness. So fitness, nutrition is a big part of that. And we have one of the best, one of the top trainers in the country works with us as it's for our people. He's the head of our people, and so it's how are you managing stress? How are you managing rest? How are you managing recovery? How are you managing your diet? How are you managing exercise, hormones, all this stuff? So we look at the holistic approach to the individual so that they can show up really well for work.
Wow. This sounds like an amazing thing that you guys do. Amazing organization.
Yeah.
Again, for those listening, it's called 5 to Flow. So yeah, that sounds really good. I mean, you're touching everything. You're touching the people. You're touching the culture. You're touching analytics. You're touching technology, which is probably innovation, and then you're touching their process. That's pretty good. I mean, that's an awesome environment,
Thank you.
or work that you guys do. So as we wrap up, tell our listeners how they can get in touch with you, and maybe sign up for this. And you talked about a free thing that you guys have on your website. So
Yep.
tell us about that. Okay.
So the website is 5toflow.com. That's FIVETOFLOW, 5toflow.com. And on that website, on all the pages, there's an access, there's a button so you can take, it's called the Wellness Wave, which is the diagnostic tool that you can, I mean, any individuals can take it, companies can take it. We'll get the scores back and and then you can reach out to us. Either you can reach out to me under I'm the head of culture, so you'll see me on there.
Mm-hmm.
On Instagram, you can find me at Sam Gibbs Morris. That's SAMGIBBS Morris, MORRIS. LinkedIn is Sam Morris, just my name. And also on LinkedIn, there's a 5to Flow page. And if there's any men out there that are interested in one-on-one coaching, you can reach out to me on Instagram for, I have a group coaching program that I offer called the Conscious Warrior Collective. And I have a one-on-one VIP coaching program.
Okay. But if they just get you at Sam Gibbs Morris, you'll be able to direct them to all that, right?
Absolutely. Yep.
Right,
Just
right.
reach out any way, any of those ways.
Okay. So that's awesome. Right. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you, Sam, for this very informative interview. Like I said, I love speaking to men about men because, yes, it's not my area of expertise. And, I want to be able to offer some content for my male listeners. So this was pretty good. If you are an organization, I'm pretty sure you're listening to this conversation now and thinking that, yeah, you need this service because, service like this always pays out in, again, your analytics and your numbers. You see it in, you see it in the end product. People are better. Your product is better. Your numbers are better. So it's always good when you invest in yourself and in the company, you see the ROI or the returns on it. So for those of you that listen regularly, you know that I'm going to have a transcript of my conversation with Sam on the show page, which is blog.madhelps.us. I will also have links to his Instagram, LinkedIn. I think that's how we connected on LinkedIn, Sam. His LinkedIn and also his website. So, just head to the show page and click on the link on there. I want to remind you guys, if you're listening on iTunes, would love for you to subscribe. If you're watching this right now on YouTube, would love for you to subscribe as well. I bring quality guests like Sam every week on the show that I'm trying to transform your mindset so that you can transform your life. That is my my purpose. That's my goal, and that's my direction. And finally, I want to invite you guys, anyone that's listening and watching, to join my Facebook group, which is called Life Coach. And on there, we have a lot of coaches and inspiration on a daily basis so that we can keep you inspired during the week. All right. So, Sam, back to you. Any last words?
Allow yourself to be a beginner in everything you do.
Okay. I like that one. That is a new quote for me. Who says that? Is that you or you're quoting someone?
That's me.
That's you?
No, that's
I love
me.
it. Allow yourself to be a beginner in everything. Yes, be the babe, right? Okay. Awesome. Well, listen, thank you guys once again for tuning in to the Transform Your Mind to Transform Your Life radio hour and podcast. And until next time, namaste.